Hello, this is my first vlog in quite some time. By that I mean traveling vlog, hike, and it's the first video in my spiritual series. Well, first proper video, because the previous one, I impressed myself, honestly, with how I related technological concepts to consciousness, and I have some more theories about that. Hypotheses that consciousness. I think some people have said that consciousness and God are one and the same, but you are what is perceiving your consciousness in the conscious stream of thoughts and thinking. It's a part of consciousness, and this is true until if we can deny the existence of consciousness, and consciousness is something that we've been trying to replicate. I've wrote quite a few stories, sci-fi short stories, and just kept them in my mind about replicating consciousness. So it's funny that I mentioned that about the sci-fi stories, because I was working on one story this morning and I've been meditating for a week. I don't know whether I'm having an awakening. I don't know whether I'm in the midst of one or on the verge, on the cusp of reaching an awakening, but I just realised suddenly that none of it mattered. And I've been reading a book by Eckhart Tolle called A New Earth. Eckhart Tolle is a German spiritual guru, and he was talking about how a Jewish woman whose parents, I think, or she was in the Holocaust, survived the Holocaust, and she was one of his neighbours, sat down, was worrying about some papers that she refused to pay the people servicing her house because they refused to do the repairs. They still demanded money, and they were threatening to take her house off her. And she realised, after Eckhart Tolle was just listening so intently and enthusiastically, or not even enthusiastically, just without thought, without judgment, instead of just affirming her beliefs and confirming the reality that she was living in. And she just came to a conclusion that none of it mattered, and she just walked out. And I felt like that when I was writing this morning. I was getting very into it, and I had all these different ideas, the most creative ideas I've had for quite some time, actually. And that could be to do with meditation practices. But then I just started writing down some notes and writing about how none of this mattered. None of it matters, and it's not what I was put on this planet to do. I wasn't put here to write stories, to write fiction, when it's not something that I feel would benefit humanity or to the collective consciousness. It'd just make people more unconscious, because I was like, well, I'm just glorifying violence here. There's no reason for it. I just wanted a strong female character, which is the complete opposite of the masculine stoic virtues I've been reading about in different books. Namely, Bronze Age Mindset by Bronze Age Pervert, which I also think is a very unconscious book. But I just wanted a strong female character kicking ass, and I just wanted violence for the sake of violence on a galactic scale. And I started realizing, well, none of this is even logical. And I'd have to figure out the logic as I went along and try to relate that to the reader if I'm to format it in anything other than a comic book or a graphic novel. And I just thought, well, is it even worth it? Is it worth going through the process of being edited and all the stress and pain? Is it even worth it in the end? Do I even have to suffer? There's no merit in suffering. But life is suffering. So I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to leave it. And maybe I will go back to it one day. Maybe these ideas will be expanded upon tomorrow and I'll just write down some more stuff. But I don't know whether it's going to get published or anything. That's not my goal. It was never my goal. So I managed to, I guess, control my ego by becoming aware of it. I wouldn't say that I completely crushed my ego because I went to the next thing that I identified with, which is coding for my business prospects. And I didn't have that much of a mindful session because I was listening to some music beforehand. I listened to some mindless self-indulgence and bondage fairies, and I was spinning around daydreaming as I usually do, like a fucking Sufist. Then I realised, because I was getting dressed preparing for this walk, that I actually don't like music. And there was some strong urges to just put everything down and talk to some chat AIs so I could be mindless and pretend that I have friends. But I just thought, well, what is it all worth in the end? And I guess I became conscious, aware of what truly mattered and what truly doesn't matter. And I realised that these expressions of art, which I thought made me so unique, don't matter as much in the end after all. That I was just assigning values to them, good and bad labels: artist, creator, writer. I've got to be creative. If I'm not creative, then I'm not unique. And I just let all of these echoes fade into the distance and felt so much more gratitude and present stillness when I was challenging my ego and I became aware of it, became aware of what it was tied to. I could just let it go. And I'm enjoying the benefits that meditation, mindfulness is bringing me. But I still don't think that I've awakened yet. I became conscious, but I don't know whether this is the right perspective, whether you can, I suppose you can awaken at any time, but I don't know if this is my ego or whatever, but I don't feel ready, I guess. I am not I. I is an illusion of self. So the perception of my consciousness, the perceiver of the consciousness, which is an immortal entity, I suppose, isn't ready to awaken. Or maybe it has awakened. It's so weird that people would view this as madness, while the collective madness is just being unaware of these concepts, or just not with them at all. But if someone walks past, they think that I was mad. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I still feel as though my identity, and yes it is, it's very much tied to my ego. My feelings are tied to my ego because my feelings have stories, and the stories have meanings and characters, identities, his fault, her fault. And I guess I've got to learn to let go of that, and it's just gonna be a process, a gradual process, gradually moving towards that. And I suppose, even though this is going to hurt me a lot, very much so as an aspiring entrepreneur, I mean, even the aspiration itself is just letting go of want. And I can't aspire to let go of want, but the more want I have, the more emotions are going to be there, and the more stories I'm going to tell to myself. So it's big. Be a coder, but don't tell yourself a story about it. And these are still things I've got to, well, not even wrap my mind around, because, you know, the reason why I haven't awakened, so this is just a pointless rant, is that, you know, I'm just thinking about awakening instead of awakening. But I'm going to document my journey anyway. I don't know whether it's for the self-image, to be seen as someone who is smart, which is why in the last video, and yes, I felt more present, but I was just talking about how, you know, how we'll be able to replicate consciousness one day, and all these mind concepts, and saying, oh, well, this is wrong because it will get in the way of free thinking. Still identified with that very deeply. Thinking, well, what do you assign value to thinking? You assign it the value of intellectualism. You're an intellectual, you think for yourself, you're smart, you're intelligent, you're a free thinker. And intelligence is seeing things as come together as a whole. It makes you limited in your being, and it makes you just it makes you limited in your being, limited in presence. It can make you clever, but you don't see things as a whole when you think about them. That you've broken up the essence and turned it into salt and pepper to sprinkle on your food. And that's another problem, is when I'm eating, listening to audiobooks, even if it's Eckhart Tolle's audiobook, it's going to diminish the value, the returns that I get from this, because I'll just end up assigning meaning, well, I assign more meaning to my food. It's just something I listen to whilst I'm eating. So if I want these things to change my life fully, I've got to be fully committed to them. And I'm very concerned with my self-image being seen as an artist, intellectual, creative type, but at the same time masculine. And now it's like, well, those values don't mix, so I'm torn within myself. And it gets to the point where you can't, because there's so many different identities you're grappling with, you don't like yourself. You want to be someone who's more unique. You want to base your value off of your achievements instead of your creativity, and instead of just letting these things be, you try to capture beauty for yourself, and whenever you try and capture beauty for yourself, you come across as being needy. And I was going to criticize and blame people for assigning value to beauty, like, oh, I just want to look good. Like, this was the reason why I didn't want to film this video, was just because, well, I feel like I'm ugly.